Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you'd like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. Thank you to TR Sun for their song All Good on today's episode. If you would like to follow along, or if you're like me and singing the lyrics makes listening to music more accessible to you, then check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. Now, on to today's episode. Josselyn Crane joins us to discuss masking, fluctuating capacity, and building community. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Josselyn, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Thanks so much for having me, Doug. I'm really excited.
I'd love to start our wonderful conversation by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
My kids started struggling with school, and then they were both evaluated, and that was around 2017, 2018. So 2018 was when I started to suspect that I might also be autistic. When my youngest was in kindergarten, I noticed he had a really intense special interest at that time. And we were meeting a lot with the teachers because it was a very controversial special interest. He loved toy guns. And I was like, wow, this really kind of tracks with what I know about monotropism and autism and things like that. So I didn't really know how much it presented. I didn't know enough about how it presents in high masking folks and AFAB people at that time, though. So we were just sort of looking at the DSM criteria, and it was like, oh, this doesn't really fit me, though. But something is different. And it wasn't until after the pandemic had started and I was involving myself more with the diagnosed community on social media and hearing more of those voices and those stories that I was feeling really confident that I could self-diagnose.
And now you're a coach for late or self-realized autistics. I read where you help people go from stressed out, burned out, overwhelmed and melting down to relaxed, resourced, and regulated. So I don't think one can help people to do that without first going on that journey personally. So how did you go about from going from overwhelm and meltdown to kind of states of regulation in your life?
This is a super insightful question. You sent the questions in advance, and I have literally been thinking about this. I've never had to really lay it out like this before, connecting my personal story with what I sort of teach in my coaching. I don't know why. I've never really, this question really brought it all into focus. So I just want to thank you for that. And, this is going to be a super broad overview because I don't think I can. It would be a whole episode if I had to go into great detail about the last 25 years of my life. So I think I've got a few bullet points. So the first one was before I really understood my autism, around the same time when my kids were getting diagnosed, before the pandemic, I was going on a self-development journey. So I started reading a lot of self-help books. I got back into therapy. I was trying to figure out what is wrong. And I know that sounds really kind of negative and judgmental, but I think that that's how the holistic world teaches us, is if you're not able to do all these things in your adult life, or if you've had certain struggles, then there's something wrong with you. So I started to read lots of books. I started to understand, about the emotional neglect in my childhood and putting pieces together about my history of self-injury. And then once I understood my autism, so many more things clicked into place, and the understanding really I was able to put all those pieces together in a fuller picture of okay, this all makes sense. So, and I think that happens to a lot of late realized people when they get the news or start to understand about their autism is that you kind of have to go through your whole life and look at everything that's happened to you through this new lens of understanding and sort of rewrite the story of your entire life. So like that's one of the things that I was able to do. And then I also started understanding about somatics. I had always tried different body-based sort of therapies. I had done dance classes. I had tried yoga. I had even taken like a mindfulness class in grad school. This was in like 2010. And none of it had really like quote unquote worked for me. I was like trying all these stress release techniques and it just wasn't fitting. It wasn't right. And then once I understood that like the body stores stress in a certain way and then the autistic body stores stress in another way that's different from how holistic bodies store stress, I really was able to learn the language of my body and like being able to read and be aware and attuned to the cues that my body was sending me about stress and how it was under stress. And then learning the tools to be able to talk back to my body about, okay, we're not stressed though. Like you might be sending me signals that you're under stress, but I know how to calm it down and say like, no, everything's okay now. And that's through like the nervous system regulation techniques. And there's a lot of it. There isn't like a specific technique that works for me. I've had to develop like a toolbox of different techniques that work through like trial and error. And I wish I had like, oh, this works for all autistic people, like a magic bullet type of somatic technique. But, you know, there's lots out there about somatics. And now the area of neurodivergence and somatics is like particularly new, and there's a lot of creators out there who are like doing really great stuff in that area. So if that's something people are curious about, yeah, I can recommend creators. I don't know if that's like allowed on this podcast.
You are more than allowed. Resources are welcomed.
Okay, so the Trauma Geek, they were really helpful. They have a fantastic course. Janae is their name. I forget what their last name is, but all their accounts are under the Trauma Geek. And I took their class and it was like really, really amazing and helpful for neurodivergent bodies. And the Body Keeps the Score is an amazing book. And then also any book by Deb Dana, who writes a lot about somatics and nervous system regulation. And then this is a big question, Doug, so you got to stick with me. There's 3 more bullet points. Is that okay?
Please keep going.
All right. So then like, it's the identity trauma piece, I would say, is something that I had to put together for myself, which is like autistic people grow up with all of these messages that you're inherently wrong, that there's something wrong with you, that you're just like the weirdest, most unacceptable, you know, other type of person. And so my self-esteem was like super duper low for the longest time. I was a huge people pleaser. It caused so many problems in my personal life and in my relationships. And so I kind of had to like rebuild my self-respect and my self-regard as a person who doesn't fit into the norms of society. And it takes a lot to be able to look at yourself and know that you don't meet people's expectations and still be okay with it. Like, still just be like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. I can be a little weird gremlin, and everyone is going to call me a little weird gremlin, but that's totally okay. And there's like skills like reparenting and self-validation and treating yourself like you would treat a good friend. People throw the word self-love around a lot, and I think it's sort of a pop psychology term that's overused, and it can mean a lot of things. But when I say I had to learn how to love myself, it was like standing up for myself, and it was learning to advocate for myself, and it was learning to validate my own feelings and my experiences, because I hadn't learned that from my parents growing up. Like they weren't there for me emotionally. So it was like figuring out how to give myself that emotional support that I'd never had before. And then that kind of ties into like the next one, which is like really dealing with the people pleasing. That's been such a huge problem for me in my life. And I think that autistic masking can present as people pleasing a lot. And I would go so far as to say that like we're now understanding that there's distinct forms of anxiety that are specific to autism. And I would go so far as to say that there is a distinct form of people pleasing that autistic people engage in, because it's not just that codependency of, oh, I need you to be okay in order for me to be okay. It's that like, this is my personality because it's my mask. Like I have created this person whose worth is entirely dependent on how other people perceive me and how useful and like how little needs I have, like how much I can provide for other people, because I'm so strange and unacceptable. And like, does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was something that I'm still working on it. I have to say, I'm not like, I would not be able to give myself a certificate of completion on fixing all of the people pleasing tendencies that I have. It's a work in progress. But boundaries really help developing the skill of being able to like hold boundaries and create boundaries and understand that they're more about what you're willing to tolerate or deal with in terms, as opposed to just making demands of other people. If we're using sort of boundary analogy of creating a little wall around yourself and a gate, at which point, or you can say, hey, here's my boundary. If you are willing to honor it, then you can come inside and hang out with me in my little garden. And if you're not willing to honor it, then I'm going to close this gate and you're not allowed in. Then it's like figuring out what's in your garden, cultivating all the little wonderful things in your garden and making your enclosure very rich with enrichment and that's a spiritual thing for me, and it's also a physical thing. So like, what is pleasing to me sensory wise about my home, and what kinds of things can I engage in at home that facilitate self-regulation and rest, but also what can I do to engage in my special interests and figure out what my stims are, and sort of that lean into autistic joy and revel in the things that make my nervous system unique, and figuring out how to, really delight in all of those sensory things that can cause overwhelm so much. But at home, when it's safe to kind of let your little sensory sensitive self out to play and like, I don't know, create fun, I call them like sensory dates with myself, where I like pick a scent that I really like for the day, and some visuals that I'm really into. And I kind of just create a fun little a really sensitive, like tactile, like layer all of the sensory experiences together. So you've got fun touches, fun scents, maybe like a little snack, fun, tastes and aromatherapy or whatever candles you want to light. And it just feels really indulgent and special.
Now, something that you have a certification in that I was really interested in is that your certification as a divorce coach. So I'd imagine that divorce is one of the biggest transitions that we can have in life, and was wondering if this transition may uniquely impact us as autistic people.
It sure does, Doug. So I wanted to say at the top, I can't generalize to all autistic people. So this won't apply to every single autistic person, but I can think of some generalizations based on what I have seen with clients and what I've like heard from communities online. So there's a few ways that specifically transitions in general and divorce maybe specifically affects autistic people. And one is that our brains love routines. And a huge transition like divorce really throws all of your routines out of whack. It can be very destabilizing in that way. It's just a huge disruption of all those routines. So like that in and of itself is a source of stress. Just on a very practical level, everything has to change now, and that can cause an increased stress for autistic people. Another one is that autistic people are more likely to intellectualize their feelings during stress. And maybe like if they have alexithymia, then they aren't even really able to figure out what they're feeling during a big life transition. And that can add to the stress because so many people want to talk about how you're feeling during a transition like that. And sometimes you're not really able to like come up with a ready answer. And that can influence people's perceptions of you during this transition. Like they might pass judgment on you because, oh, you should be feeling or you should be exhibiting stress in these ways, in these socially acceptable ways. And I don't see you doing that. So you're weird or you're cold or you're too robotic during this. And in divorce proceeding, that can affect you legally in some ways because everyone's kind of scrutinizing your behavior for like, you know, oh, you must not care about me. This must not mean anything to you, or you're acting really cold. Therefore, maybe you're guilty of something, or you've moved on really quickly. So, like, autistic people can also undergo a lot of scrutiny, extra scrutiny during that time because of the way they like process emotions and stress. And also, like, well, I mean, this is a really difficult truth about being autistic, but autistic people are more likely to end up in abusive or controlling relationships. And so, like, a lot of autistic people, when they're going through a big transition like this, are doing so because, like, there's some element of abuse or, you know, they weren't leaving healthy relationships necessarily. And not only that, but like, autistic people who struggle with employment are often in a more vulnerable situation leaving a relationship because it's harder for them to like find, you know, that support, the financial support, and the spouse might have been supporting them. And even though they were abusive, they have trouble leaving because they are not as easily able to find employment afterwards. So that puts them in like an extra vulnerable position. So there's no real like solution for that. It just is a thing that can come up frequently in this sort of like situation. And all of that stuff can add to just like having more meltdowns, just struggling more with the dysregulation and all of the sort of more needs to stim and take care of yourself and seek support. And you might turn to like more maladaptive coping mechanisms like drinking or substance use, or you might see like an increase in an eating disorder or things like that. So those are just things to look out for too. Like a lower tolerance for sensory stimuli. You might even like get to a burnout point through all of the stress of the transition. I mean, it can like any terrible thing you could imagine sort of can happen. So it's really important to have a really strong support system if you can, and like reach out for support through like institutional support, like therapists or coaches or lawyers or what have you, but then also friend support and people who understand not just like you as a person, but like your autism too, that can really support you as being like an autistic person going through divorce.
Now, recently you wrote a blog post on your website about autistic energy. And one of the things that you touched on in that blog was fluctuating capacity. I don't know if we've specifically talked about that term here on Autism Stories, although I think we've talked about the subject a few times. So for our listeners that might not be aware of fluctuating capacity, can you talk about this and how it might impact our energy levels as autistic people?
I don't know where I heard the term, but it just has stuck with me as something that really explains a lot about the autistic experience. And it's something that comes up in coaching a lot with people where they'll come to me and they're like, yeah, I just really want to have what sounds like, and they don't say this out loud. Usually they come and they say like, yeah, I really struggle because fall off the wagon or I feel really lazy and then I can't keep up with stuff and all of the things at home start piling up or I get really stressed out and then I can't do it all. And usually what I have to tell people is like, I'm really, really sorry to break this news to you, but you can't. That's just part of being autistic is having fluctuating energy levels and fluctuating capacity. And what you describe when you say, like, yeah, some days I can do all the things and I have the energy, and then other days I can't. That's just how it's going to be. Like, you're just going to have the high days and then the low days. And you kind of have to plan for the low days. And once you kind of accept that those low days are going to happen with relative frequency and you have a plan for what you do on those low days, then it's not, it kind of, it takes the pressure off to have the same consistent level of energy all the time. And I tell autistic clients that it's more about being resilient, being able to weather those highs and lows than it is about having any certain level of consistency that you'd be able to like train your brain into or something. Because that's the like non-autistic expectation is that you're just supposed to have the same exact energy level every single day and be able to get the same exact amount of things done every single day. And autistic people just don't have that experience usually, and that's okay. It's nothing to be ashamed over. And like this focus on how productive you are is very harmful for autistic people because there just are days when you're not as productive and you shouldn't feel like really bad about yourself on those days. Like, don't judge yourself and beat yourself up on days when you just can't get it done.
Yeah, there's so many factors that I think impact fluctuating capacity, and one that you're even talking about earlier, I think, has a lot to do with it in terms of like people pleasing.
Mm-hmm. So many things can affect your capacity. There's not like a one-to-one, like, oh, well, I've been really stressed at work, so I have less capacity. It could be sensory triggers. It could be just this overarching stress. Like if you're going through a divorce, I try to tell people who are going through big life transitions, like I have clients that are moving and they're like, yeah, I just don't understand what it is. I feel so overwhelmed all the time. And I'm like, maybe it's because your brain's processing so much about this transition that you just have less capacity. Yeah, and trying to ignore your needs in order to do what you think other people want you to do, like you said, as a people pleaser, that can definitely, ignoring your needs is something that is going to land you in low capacity zone for sure.
Now, thinking about like things like burnout and masking, a critical aspect of this is finding community or people that we can safely sort of unmask with. You've done that with being the co-creator of the Spicy Brain Collective. And one of the aspects of the events of Spicy Brain Collective is that I think is important is the concept of mutual aid. How are you implementing mutual aid in your social events? And what have you seen from kind of that implementation of making sure to include mutual aid in community?
I believe that mutual aid is so important for autistic people because there's such a lack of institutional support for us, like especially late diagnosed autistics. So I built mutual aid into the foundation of the Spicy Brain Collective because I was inspired by another local Facebook group, which is run by a portion of the Autistic Self Advocacy Network folks in Pittsburgh. And that's called the Pittsburgh Disability Mutual Aid Facebook group. And they do a wonderful job of really like emulating how they do a great job of helping people give and receive mutual aid. Like their group is 100% focused on mutual aid. And now we don't we don't run an entirely mutual aid focused group in the Spicy Brain Collective, but for example, like all of our meetings are free to attend. So we're really committed to not charging people money so that they can, there's no barriers to entry. We try to make the meetups really accessible in terms of like transportation and like physical location so that, you know, if people ride public transportation, they can access the events and things like that. And then we also have a Discord channel as part of our community. And there's a mutual aid channel like in the Discord so people can ask, like, if they need something, they can ask for it. And if the community is able to provide it for free, then, that's where that they can make those requests. Kind of like a buy nothing group. If they have like stuff at home or if they need a ride somewhere, they can make those requests there. And people can also like give and receive advice, questions, venting. So there's like an emotional support component to the Discord group as well, where they can like vent about problems and ask questions and get crowdsourced solutions. And then we've also actually run swap style events where people can exchange things without, any money changing hands. We did a craft supply swap last year that was pretty successful. So that was really fun.
So beyond the aspect of mutual aid, what have you learned about connecting with others and building communities since the creation of the Spicy Brain Collective?
This honestly was so like life-changing and transformational, and I didn't really expect it. I just kind of understood that autistic people should be in community more with other autistic people. And a lot of the issues that we run up against in terms of our self-esteem, in terms of having quote unquote problems socializing, are only really hold true when we're stuck socializing with other non-autistic people. So like all of those social problems that are literally in the DSM as part of like the pathology of autism, they go away when autistic people socialize with other autistic people. Like the issues with reading social cues and reciprocity and all of the things that are pathologized about autism are just all of a sudden not an issue when autistic people are socializing with other autistics. So it's been actually so magical because it's so healing. Like once you can let go of that pressure of masking as much or being worried and having that anxiety about like, ugh, am I doing this right? Did people think I was weird? Like, did I come across okay? Was I rude? Did they perceive me in XYZ negative ways? Like all of that is just kind of gone. And when that's gone and you can just socialize and have fun for the sake of socializing and having fun for like sometimes the first time in your life, it's hard to explain how transformational that can be, to have like a safe place to be able to socialize where people won't just assume the worst about you or that you have bad intentions or they're trying to like supply subtext to everything that you're doing and saying when there really is none. So it really can like increase people's self-esteem, build their self-confidence, their self-advocacy skills. It allows them to like show up more authentically and just have less anxiety and build up those social muscles in a place that's like really safe. And I actually feel so passionately about the transformational power of being in community with autistic people that I submitted an abstract about the project to the Europe Autism Congress this year, and it got accepted. So I'll actually be going to Dublin, Ireland to present about how effective the SBC has been for the people in the community.
And how can our listeners learn more about you and what you do beyond this interview?
Join my email list. So I'm actually taking a break from social media. I am on Instagram and TikTok as Josselyn C. Coach, but I haven't been posting there. So you can see my previous content if you go onto Instagram and TikTok under Josselyn C. Coach. But I would encourage people to go to my website, josselync.com, and sign up for my email list because I am still sending out weekly emails about fun tips and tricks for autistic people.
Well, Josselyn, it's always a pleasure talking with you. So thanks so much for coming on to Autism Stories and sharing more about your story.
Thanks so much for having me, Doug. This was great.
Thanks so much to Josselyn for the conversation. To learn more about Josselyn, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode regarding if you experience fluctuating capacity. If so, we'd like to know how you cope with that experience. Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to be the best version of their authentic selves through our customized life coaching and community groups. We also support parents and partners of autistic people by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. So please visit autismpersonalcoach.com to begin your experience of judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.